want you to imagine that you just fell hundreds of feet and now you're slowly opening your eyes and you see the top of a mountain. And you are internalizing this and you don't know if you are dead or alive. But then, the more that you come to your senses, you realize the unthinkable happened. Now, would you have the strength to somehow get out of there and survive? Or would you fall into the depths of despair? What's going on, everybody? I got a great, thrilling story for you today. So if you could, just hit that like button if you could. But either way, we're about to slip into a mind that's not our own. Let's go. Okay, so in 1985, Joe Simpson and Simon Yates were two young and ambitious British climbers, and they set their sights on conquering the treacherous west face of Siula Grande, which was a towering 6,344 meter peak nestled in the heart of the Peruvian Andes. Now, this mountain was known for its unforgiving terrain and unpredictable weather as well. Plus, it had never been successfully climbed before, making this even more of an irresistible challenge for the intrepid duo. And as they began their ascent, the weight of the task ahead hung heavy in the mountain thin air. The west face of Siula Grande loomed before them. Just imagine a vertical maze of jagged rock and gleaming ice. Joe and Simon, at that moment, their faces were etched with a mixture of determination and apprehension. But methodically, they made their way up that mountain, their crampons biting into the frozen surface with each carefully placed step. Because if it wasn't carefully placed, that step could be your demise. And the climb was grueling, testing the absolute limits of their physical endurance and their mental fortitude. The higher that they climbed, the more unforgiving that the terrain and that the conditions became. I mean, imagine just bitter winds were chopping across their face, threatening to tear them from the mountainside, while the thin atmosphere made each breath a laborious effort. But Joe and Simon continued to press on. They were driven by this unshakable resolve to reach the summit of the mountain. But right as they neared the top, they were close to it, the weather took a turn for the worse, and these dark clouds started gathering overhead, obscuring the sun and casting this ominous shadow over the entire mountain. And just like that, the temperature started plummeting and the wind intensified, howling like a wounded animal. Clearly, Joe and Simon exchanged worried glances, knowing that they were now in a race against time. But with this final desperate push, they reached the summit of Siula Grande. And exhausted but elated, they stood atop of this mountain, taking in the breathtaking vista of the Andes stretching out way before them. But their triumph was, however, short-lived, as they knew that their descent would be even more treacherous than the climb. So as they slowly began to make their way down, the storm that had been brewing finally unleashed its fury. I mean, this snow and ice was pelting them from every direction, reducing visibility to a near zero. And literally each step became a gamble. I mean, these once solid footholds now transformed into these slippery, unpredictable minefields. And as they descended, the storm intensified even more, battering them with this relentless fury. And as you could imagine, the cold at this point was bone deep, seeping through their layers of clothing and numbing their extremities. But then, suddenly, without warning at all, Joe's foot slipped, and he felt a sickening crack in his leg. Pain shot through his body like a bolt of lightning, and he knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. In fact, he had shattered his leg. The lower bone was jutting grotesquely out through his kneecap. But Simon, realizing the severity of this situation, actually sprang into action, because he knew that leaving Joe on the mountain alone would be a death sentence. So he devised a plan to lower his injured partner down the face using a series of ropes and anchors. It was a risky maneuver, but it was literally their only hope. So with painstaking care, Simon began to lower Joe down the mountain, anchor by anchor by anchor. The process was agonizingly slow, as Simon had to repeatedly secure himself in a snow seat before lowering Joe on a 90-meter rope. And then each time that Joe would reach the end of the rope, he would give it a little tug, signaling to Simon that he was safe. After the tug and Simon realized that Joe was okay, Simon would then make his way down to join Joe, and the arduous process would begin all over again. And at this point, as they're descending, the storm is even picking up more. And at this point, Simon's hands were raw and blistered from the rope, and he began to actually lose feeling in them, making the lowering procedure a test of sheer willpower. But unbeknownst to Simon, he had lowered Joe over an overhang, leaving him suspended in midair, unable to communicate his predicament. Now imagine this, just for about an hour, but what felt like an eternity, Joe dangled there helplessly, the weight of his broken body pulling on the rope with increasing urgency. And then you got Simon that's just anchored above, felt the growing tension on the rope, and he had no way of knowing whether Joe was alive or dead at this point. I mean, Joe couldn't let Simon know that he was still alive because the rope was so tight. But Simon at this point, he could feel himself being dragged inescapably in a way that he could not prevent from going any closer to the ledge. And the minutes ticked by. Each one of them became an agonizing eternity, literally, as Simon fought against the relentless pull of gravity. And with each passing moment now, the reality of the situation became increasingly clear. Simon was faced with an impossible choice: to hold on and risk being pulled down to his own death, or to cut the rope and save himself. It was a decision that absolutely no climber ever wants to face, a moment that would haunt him for the rest of his life. So, in a final act of agonizing self-preservation, Simon made the heart-wrenching decision to take the knife and cut the rope. And with a single swift motion, he severed the lifeline that bound him to his partner, sending Joe plummeting down into the unknown depths below, splashing like a wave into the merciless snow and rocks beneath. And then the silence that followed that was deafening, broken only by the howling of the wind and the pounding of Simon's heart. So he sat there, numb with grief and shock, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what really just happened. Joe, his friend and climbing partner, was gone, swallowed up by the merciless jaws of the mountain. So at this point, devastated and alone, Simon made his way down the mountain, his mind just reeling with the weight of his decision. I mean, he actually had no way of knowing if Joe was already dead before he cut the rope and the drop happened. Plus now he has no idea what state his body is in. But, in a miraculous twist of fate, Joe crashed through a glacier and landed on a smaller ledge, badly injured, but alive. And this is that part of his story. Okay, so about a third of the way down the ice cliff, Joe was thinking, don't fall here, do not fall here, because Simon was coming down and there was this slack rope that was between them. At that moment, Joe put his right axe in, and then the ice disintegrated. And then he landed right at the base of the cliff. He said that his right leg was locked backwards and that his crampons were maximizing the force. He also said it punched his tibia up into his femur and it carried on through his whole knee joint. He also said that he tore his anterior cruciate ligament and damaged his peroneal nerve, destroyed 2 meniscus cartilages in his knee, and fractured his heel and ankle. The pain he was in that moment was absolutely excruciating. And Joe, of course, was in denial at first, so he tried to just stand there and felt all these bones starting to snap and break. And when Simon appeared, he asked if Joe was okay. And that's when Joe told Simon that he broke his leg, and Simon's expression immediately changed. Because before this, they were equal partners working together. And now suddenly, one of them was invalid. I mean, they had a 3,000-foot face to still get down. And Joe was thinking at this point, I'm dead. I mean, at that moment already, he probably already lost about a quart of blood, almost a liter internally. And he was going down as fast as Simon could lower him. Every 150 feet, the knot joining the two ropes would come and hit Simon's friction device. And that was Joe's signal to get his weight off the rope, and then Simon would unclip, put the knot on the other side of the device, give 3 tugs, and start lowering Joe again. Think about this. After an hour, they were 300 feet down. So they had to do this 10 more times to get to the bottom of the mountain. But what they didn't realize was that they were in line with this ice cliff that was sticking out from the slope. And at 9:30 p.m., Simon lowered Joe off the edge and came to a stop where Joe was about 100 feet in the air, and there was this shadow that covered the crevices beneath him. The knot had reached its friction device, because Joe's weight was on the rope and he couldn't get the knot over. I mean, they were literally locked into the system and going to die. He said that Simon hung on for what seemed like a lifetime, and then all of a sudden he felt himself free falling. At that point, he hit the ridge of the crevice and went through. He smashed into an old collapsed part of the roof and stopped. And he saw a hole in the roof about 70 plus feet above him at this time, and he thought that, wow, Simon had gone flying. Yes, at this moment, Joe actually thought that Simon was the one who died, holding in that position for over an hour and finally just letting go. I mean, Joe thought he's gone because he pulled on the rope thinking it would come down tied to his buddy. And Joe was thinking at the time, okay, Simon's gone, but I can pull the rope down and kind of use it as a counterweight and climb up to the rope. But at that moment, the end of the rope lashed down around him. And that's when he noticed that Simon had cut it. Now, as you can imagine, the states of shock that somebody might be in at that moment, still, with an unshakable determination, Joe began the arduous process of crawling back to base camp. Each movement was an excruciating ordeal as he dragged his broken body across this unforgiving terrain. The cold literally bit into his flesh and the pain threatened to almost overwhelm him at some times, but he refused to give up. For 3 whole days, Joe fought his way back to the camp, driven by this unquenchable thirst for life. He crawled through snow and ice, navigated these treacherous crevices, and hopped on one leg when needed when the pain became too tough. And of course, during those 3 days, his mind would play these tricks on him, conjuring up these crazy hallucinations and tempting him with the sweet release of surrender. But Joe Simpson was not a man to be defeated. With each agonizing inch, he defied the mountain, defied death itself. And when he finally, 3 days later, stumbled into the base camp, a mere couple of hours before Simon and their third companion were set to depart, it was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph and serendipity in a way that they hadn't already left. Now, in the years that followed, Joe and Simon's story would be told and retold, inspiring generations of climbers and adventurers. It was literally a tale of survival against all odds. A reminder that the bonds of friendship and that the tenacity of a human can and will overcome even the most daunting of challenges. Today, the west face of Siula Grande stands as a silent witness to the extraordinary events that happened in 1985. It is literally a mountain that has bore witness to the best and worst of human nature. It has seen the heights of courage and the depths of despair. And when it comes to Joe Simpson and Simon Yates, the scars of that fateful climb will never truly heal, but their story will endure, a lasting testament to the incredible spirit of the human race, and a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable adversity, hope and resilience can shine through, as bright and unyielding as the sun on a desolate mountaintop. And there's actually over a 300-page book that Joe Simpson wrote after this called Touching the Void. So if you enjoyed this and you want to learn more about this, give it a read. But if you're looking for an even crazier story, then you might want to click this one right here. But that's all I got for you guys, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.